Good afternoon, everyone. My presentation is about public speaking. And I think throughout the morning, each speaker in the opening session, they were talking about scientists as such a bad communicator. And public speaking can be very daunting, not only as a scientist, but maybe as an introvert. How do you begin to communicate with people that you're not familiar with, you don't know their background, and maybe you don't even have time to do background studies. So it can be very challenging, and you might find yourself not knowing what to say in the beginning. So I wanted to ask one of the participants if they can share with me, with us, their first experience of public speaking as scientists. How was it and where was it? And to whom were they communicating with? Any volunteer? You see, public speaking is very difficult, and hence no one wants to volunteer. So, you want to volunteer? Okay. Thank you.
I remember when I was doing my PhD fairly early on, one of my earliest public speaking engagements at a conference, I was absolutely terrified. Absolutely terrified. I didn't sleep the night before. Stood up, gave my presentation. Nobody cared what I said. It was completely uninteresting. It wasn't delivered very well. Really anxious. It wasn't a very good experience. It had no impact. That was my first experience.
Thank you, Julie. Oh, you see? So when one speaks up, the other feel comfortable to speak up about their failure. So vulnerability is very important in public speaking. You don't have to be perfect, but just allow yourself to communicate, even if it's difficult. Okay, I saw David's hand and Olivia's hand.
I had been elected as a deputy speaker. That was in my A-level. In Uganda, we have O-level and A-level. That is high school. So I had to give a speech. But man, I was so nervous. I had campaigned so well. I won the vote. But giving that speech, it was a journey. Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Thank you. Ms. Damin?
Okay, I've always thought I don't have fears in public speaking because I had much experience addressing people in church. But then I was given an assignment to go and do a live show in radio when we were introducing the geoscience, geophysical exploration exercise. At the end of the show, the listeners even had to call in. I was already frightened by the fact that I'm live on radio. And then when they started asking questions, I was shaking. Nobody's business.
Thank you. Again, it's showing vulnerability. The first time you give public speaking is always difficult. But as a scientist, you must push through and just hope and wish that people will understand you. That's why we're having this workshop. I will allow David to say his first experience as well.
I remember it like it was yesterday. American Geophysical Union Conference. It was in San Francisco in December, and it was a Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. It was first time speaking, in front of many people. Also, I was at the time doing a PhD, and the previous night I was sharing a room with one of my my colleagues, and he could hear me reciting the presentation in bed. And so he thought I was dreaming, you know. And I was just reciting every slide, you know, and I didn't even have I had crammed what I wanted to say, you know. And the next day, I couldn't remember anything, you know. I went in front and it was a blank, you know. I felt so bad, but I went through it. It was the worst 20 minutes of my life. But you know, eventually there was a couple of questions. I think they saw that I was nervous and they didn't ask questions. It was more comments, you know. So I was like, oh, thank you for the comment. Thank you for the comment. But yeah, it was horrifying. It really was. So I after that, I just went back and slept and didn't want to talk to anybody. But it was a good experience. And it, you know, as you say, you become vulnerable and but you learn from it as well. And the more you do this, the better you get at it. So yes, I remember.
I also remember my first experience. I think I was very fortunate because English is a second language. So in high school, we used to have discussions as groups, discussion about physics. So you have to, physics and chemistry. I was doing physical science. So you have to explain your understanding of physics in your mother tongue and chemistry in your mother tongue. So we used to have those discussions, translating physics and chemistry in my mother tongue, which is Tshivenda, so that everybody in a group can understand it. And in high school, we used to have debates. So physics students will have to debate with economists, and there will be general questions such as, how does your field, the specialty is physical science, the other is economics, how does physical science contribute to the economy? And then you have to debate with the economist people. And then the more you debate in a class, the more you gain confidence on how you can communicate. But when you go to varsity, it's different because now you are focused on your field of study. And there was no course about communication at all until in 2008, when the UN declared 2008 the year of planet Earth. And in this country, in South Africa, the Department of Science and National Science Foundation had an initiative that encouraged postgraduate students and lecturers to go around the country and do outreach, educating the public, primary school students, high school students, about their field of study. So we used to go to other school in a nearby university and talk about geology. And that's where we learned that we need to simplify what is geology to us and what geology means to them. So when I moved to Council for Geoscience, again, I had no idea how the Geological Survey communicated. Likely there was one communication specialist in the whole organization. So I approached her and said, no, I've been doing outreach activities in university. If there's anything that you want me to help with, I would like to learn more about this. And that's how I became more interested in communicating science. But since most of us here in this room are from the Geological Survey, I thought it's important to understand what is the role of our organization or the Geological Surveys in general. Our role there, we are the custodian of all geological information. It means that any institution, if they need information, they can come to us and we have to unpack them in the language that they understand. And I think David explained about the policy and Julie about the narrative of communicating that science. And there are a whole lot of things that we do using that geoscience knowledge. I'm not going to go into it. I think we are all familiar with it. But most importantly is that all geological surveys receive funding from the public. And I think it's very important that when we receive this funding and we conduct geoscience research, we're able then, at the end of the project or throughout the project, we communicate this science to them. but we communicate to them in a very simple language. We can even use cartoons to demonstrate our science. We don't have to use big words and so on. So why do we need to communicate this science to the public? Science is a public good. It responds to societal needs. In South Africa now, we have challenges of load shedding. We have challenges of water. So how do we communicate solutions that can bring water into communities? So we have to find a way to simplify that. We can do groundwater studies. What is groundwater studies? Then you break it down. You can even use a graph to show what is groundwater studies and how we can then get more water, as an example. But in literature, there are so many reasons why we need to do, why we need to communicate to the public and stakeholders. So these are some of the reasons. I think the most important one is to close the gap. Science is regarded as a distant field, something that is far, and they think is difficult. So every time, even here in Ndivhuwo, when you say you're a geologist, they look at you like, wow, you must be very intelligent. Geology is a very difficult field. So we have made it ourselves so far away from the people. So we need to bring geology to the people, and we need to simplify it in the language that they understand. And in the long term, we can create that open system rather than the current one, which is a closed system where only few people understand how our work impacts their lives or the daily activities and the economy of the country. So we need to really, every day, even if you're in the shops and somebody's asking something, you know that maybe what they're asking can influence them to understand geology, especially now with load shedding and groundwater and water challenges. So we do, wherever we go, we do preach a little bit about science, that, we are Council for Geoscience. If you need any maps, please come to us. We can give you maps related to groundwater studies and things like that. So communicating science is a diverse field. As geologists, today you are in Ndivhuwo. Tomorrow you find yourself in the village communicating the work that you plan to do in the field. And sometimes you find yourself, doing documentary and discussing geology. So I thought I must use my own images here just to demonstrate that, we are very multidisciplinary as a scientist. So the first picture here, this one, was taken in the field where the local chief requested a geological map of his village. So my colleague, Mbuyiseni, he just stepped out. This is Mbuyiseni. We were there explaining to him the geology of his area and the potential mineral occurrences. And on the far right there, it's me again, having a discussion about geoscience. And bottom picture here, I was in Zambia in 2014 and having a meeting about institutional strengthening of the Geological Survey. What was interesting is that I was the only female in that particular meeting, which is very common in a geoscience environment. And it can be very daunting for you to speak up. Because in our African culture, women normally are not the one who speaks. It's the man that speaks first, and then later you can speak. So now when you are in a scientific environment, you are allowed to speak freely, but you can be scared because these are all men, and how do you then just have your say? So you must have courage and just speak your mind. And men normally listen in this environment. So the middle one, the bottom one, we were doing science. There was a science festival. Each year, the government conduct National Science Week. Normally happens in September. So the Council for Geoscience, we normally go to those science festival, and we often go with exciting rock samples so that the kids can then zoom in. As you can see here, she was very excited to look at the conglomerates from the vats that has some sulfide, so they thought it was gold. So we always try to inculcate them so that they can be interested in what we want to tell them. And the bottom right, I was at the UN, at the launch of the UN Women. And this was one of the biggest events at the time. So sometimes you find yourself in one of the biggest events where there are different types of people. Some are not interested in science, but because you are there to represent a scientific community, you then have to allow yourself to be vulnerable and introduce yourself and introduce your country and what you are doing in your country, so that possibly potential sponsors, they can be interested in your work. So where do you start? You know, geology can be very complex, and unpacking difficult, complicated stuff can be very difficult. So you have to just calm down. You know, that's very important. Calm down, think through in a chronological order since you're a scientist, and you will be able to then unpack that science that you want to communicate to the public. So where do you really start in communicating? You really need to have clear aims and intentions of communicating science. So your intentions will define the method of communication, whether you need to do live public speaking or you do media interventions, that's social media. So if the intention is to engage with the audience and to get immediate feedback, then live audience will be the perfect one. But if the intention is to reach large potential audience, then social media will be the perfect, because you can post on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and Twitter, then you'll get a large feedback. So who are you targeting? I think Julie spent so much time on this this morning. So it's very important to know the demographics, the gender, the race, the age, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs. So the picture there, it's me bowing down to a senior person in a village. In certain parts of the country, it's very important when you are going to do stakeholder engagement or giving public speaking in rural areas to then honor the leadership of the area. We call them chiefs or Ndivhuwo. They have different names, but this is the leadership of the village. So you can see I'm wearing a long dress because they don't like women wearing pants, cover the whole body, wear a scarf because that's their belief system. They think a woman should be covered. So we respect their culture and tradition. And then you greet them in this way. So once you do that, they feel comfortable for you to continue with the discussions and they can open up. And you can see this was followed by me presenting our work in that particular region. It is also important to have a meeting in their place of preference where they feel comfortable. So in rural areas, if it's not raining, the community prefer to have a meeting under trees because it's very hot. So if you go to a community hall, it could be too much heat. But if you're under the tree, because that's where the traditional leadership often have their meetings. So you are adapting to their environment and you are respecting what they believe is important to them. So we had at the Council for Geoscience, especially in rural areas, we had a lot of our stakeholder engagement meetings under the tree. This is our CEO speaking somewhere And I think David was sitting somewhere. I think a lot of our colleagues were there. So we want to make sure that we are not disrespecting them. We are within the area where they feel comfortable. And the next slide is the method of communication. There are so many methods of communication. You can give public lectures, practical workshops, science festival. We have done a lot of science festival, traditional houses, I just mentioned before. We also go to local municipalities and give them update of our projects. And it's very important because our work as Geological Survey, they feedback to their needs. And when they feedback to the local municipality, it then goes to the people on the ground. So we do all this kind of work, and I think it's very, very important. So preparations, you have to prepare. As you heard David, he said he spent the whole night rehearsing his speech. So as Julie said, who is your audience? So you must know who's your audience. How long are you supposed to be speaking in that event, so that you don't speak longer or you're not sure of the time. So you must be very sure. You must ask the organizer, how long am I supposed to speak? And what is the purpose of the session? It's very, very important to know the purpose of the session, so that you can draft your presentation aligning with the purpose of the session. And the next point is, what are the logistical arrangements? What is it that is not allowed? What is it that is allowed? The dress code. In South Africa, we have many political affiliations, and they have specific colors. So for example, if I wear a green, yellow, black, they might think I'm aligning with a certain political organization. If I wear a red dress, a red duke, immediately, if I'm in the wrong geopolitical location, they won't even allow me to speak, because immediately they'll think, you belong to this organization. How come you just wear like this? You know, in this area, we align with the green, yellow, and black. So that's very important when we do our stakeholder engagements and presentation in local areas and local communities. Another thing is very important to communicate with the event manager ahead of time. And please arrive early to the event so that you can have an opportunity to speak to the engineer. And if it's possible, you can ask them to display your presentation so that you can have a feel of the room. Because sometimes if you are speaking those big auditorium, your slide is very huge, and then you become very fearful that you're big and you are standing here, you look so small. So when you have time, you can pretend at that 5 minutes that you're giving how you're going to narrate, whether you need to move to the other side. So you can see I'm standing here because I can't go to the middle like the CEO, because I'm slightly taller than the CEO. So things like that. So you need to organize yourself, know the room. Can I move this way? If I move this way, is the presentation going to be clear or not? Have a plan and stick to it. Don't go overboard with your presentation. Just stick to the plan and play to your strength. So, for example, sometimes when you give presentation, we have slides that we are not much familiar with, or we don't have much confidence in. But because we work in the geological surveys, so if you specialize in structural geology, but you have a slide that talks about geohazards, you can bring along your colleague and say, my colleague, please, you will present this slide because you understand it better. This is what you do. And the audience really can feel when somebody is not familiar with what they are presenting. So don't do it alone. Bring your colleagues and you can present together. And that also shows teamwork. And teamwork is very important when you're doing public engagement. So they know that at Council for Geoscience, we don't work in silos. We bring everyone with. So it really helps in the long term. And be confident, you know. They say fake it until you make it. So even if you're not confident, you must, you know, show, like, move around. I heard you must move around. But you can move around, interact with people, look at the people, and ask questions that can make them to speak up a little bit. I think I've already said focus on the audience. And please keep your presentation very simple, because you want your audience to think and feel and do as a result of listening to your talk. How will your audience feel after listening to your talk? What will your audience do after listening to your talk? Will they be interested to learn more about your geological survey and other work that you're doing? Will they feel comfortable to contact you or to call you? So they must feel at home while you are still presenting your work to them. And of course, you must rehearse. In the Geological Survey, I think we are very fortunate because we work with diverse people. So what you can do, at the Council for Geoscience, we normally have a session where you can sit with your own colleagues, and you can also bring colleagues from the different departments, and you give your talk before the actual date. So then they can give you constructive feedback. But if you're going to present to people who are not scientists, which is often the case, when you go home, ask your friends one night and present to them and get their feedback. Do they understand what you are saying? If they don't understand, ask them, how can I present it in a simple way? So I learned that sometimes you just ask your sister to sit in, or your cousins, people with different backgrounds, and they can give you a feedback of how you can present and how you can maybe pronounce certain words that, you know, I have a strong Venda accent. So my English comes in a Venda accent. So they will say, no, I think maybe slow down a bit so that you allow the audience to hear what you're saying. Don't talk too fast because your accent is very strong. Things like that helps in public engagement. I think I already mentioned about the dress code. So, you know, dress in a way that you feel comfortable. If you don't wear high heel like myself, don't even try. Just wear something that you're comfortable with and show up. Always show up. I got this slide from Dr. Marina Jobert. She is a communication specialist at Stellenbosch University. And I love this graph because she said you might have a knowledge about the subject. You might be knowledgeable about geology and geoscience. But if you're presenting without compassion and passion, the room won't light up. So you must be passionate about your work, and that will show up in a room and everybody will enjoy. And at the end of the day, they will call you a rock star. Thank you.